So as Jakub mentioned, I used to work with STX Next, and it's really great to be again with one of your events. So thanks for the invitation. Currently, I work as a principal software engineer at WebInterpret. It's a product company, a totally different thing. But that's my 9-to-5 job. Apart from that, I'm kind of an evangelist of software engineering in Python. I share my knowledge on events like this. I happen to write a book, and I also write a blog. So it may be a possibility that you have already saw some of my content. But when I was listening to Maciej Dziergrywa presentation about how Python becomes more popular, that got me thinking. Luckily, I already had a presentation for that. But the thing is, when Python gets more into popularity, and of course, there is a very wide variety of projects that are made in Python. Some are more about machine learning, some are more about data, and there are also things like products. And I am here today because some of these products that are going to be started even tomorrow with a clean slate are going to turn into this. And if you've been working for some time, it's a possibility that you have already saw such a thing, such a product that resembles this brown blob of something, some substance, I guess. And it turns out that the software engineering has already a name for that, of course, because it's a science of programming and software development in general. And Python is no different. This is a big ball of mud, this kind of a project, when there is no evident architecture. Even if there was some vision, it's long gone, along with the people who wrote it in the first place. And there are always good reasons. I mean, there are always reasons, maybe not good, for projects to turn into this kind of a thing. Maybe it's due to high turnover rate, maybe it's a pressure, maybe not understanding requirements enough, maybe just a lack of experience and knowledge and so on, okay? We can't, of course, judge every situation, but then the industry noticed that this happens over and over with the projects, and there were multiple attempts of solving this, and one of the recent ones was with microservices. So one of the selling points of microservices was, okay, so if we have a big nasty monolith, maybe let's split it into several smaller parts, and let's call it microservices, because we are so young, we no longer remember service-oriented architectures and stuff that was before it. And my problem with microservices that I also want to warn you before is that if your only problem is how to organize your code, you shouldn't reach for these microservices, because they are a lot more complex than a monolithic system. And whoever worked with a microservice architecture that has been divided wrong, and maybe there were microservices created just for the sake of being micro, that doesn't laugh at the circus anymore. Releases hell, all this kind, managing and maintaining dozens, if not hundreds of microservices when there are only a few developers at the team is a nightmare. But unfortunately, these people are the victims of the aggressive selling of different ideas without really understanding what they really do need. So, but the bottom line is that the approach to get rid of one big problem and instead deal with a few smaller ones is a good one. But sometimes maybe you don't need to distribute the application. Nonetheless, you still need some robust way to divide the system into smaller manageable parts. And this is what this presentation will be about. I want to show you how to split the project into the smaller pieces and how to keep order in general with domain-driven design as a pattern. But speaking of clean slates, let's do just another project. Let's do just another system. Let's assume that we will be creating a bookmaking platform So as every platform, it starts off with a login page when you can enter your email and password. You can see that these screens are pretty thin because mobile first, it's now the thing. So why not? And yeah, if you see such a thing and you have wrote a few projects in the past, maybe you already know which framework would you like to use to code it, or maybe a cloud service if you are working with cloud providers. But the core thing of the bookmaking platform would be basically making bets, when you can choose like which football match you want to bet on, and who you think will win. The system will tell you what are the odds, and what can be your potential profit given your investment, so to speak, and so on. And the thing is, when you are like following this line of thought and deriving requirements from the screenshots, you actually can see not only the framework or the cloud service, but also the data structure that you will use. You are already tempted to sit at the keyboard and start typing. But that's not all, of course, because people like don't bet on football matches just for the sake of a pleasure of feeling winning, but they want to earn some money on top of it. And of course, when they will earn the money in the end, they would like to pay out this money. And okay, so we probably need some list of bank accounts. And again, I can see the data structure already. Yeah, there will be a list of bank accounts in the database. Yeah, that's simple. And of course, you can also at this stage, even this is very superficial analysis, you can also see that probably you need some integration of the banks, probably not direct, through some third-party provider and so on. But the thing is that it's not that simple. You can't just pay out money to anyone who registers with a generic name like John Doe or Jan Nowak in Poland. You still need to verify this person, whether they are, for example, in Poland, a law obliges you to check if the person has 18 years old at least. And the other thing is there are also lots of international laws related to anti-money laundering policies and so-called know your customer procedures that basically obliges you to gather some information about the people that use your product, to be just compliant with the law, to prevent like money from criminal activities to be cleaned. So like it's not just that simple. And also, even if someone fills the form that you can see on the screen, they will enter their personal details, a picture of their personal ID, and give a date of birth. It's not over yet, because it's not that we just need this data. You are not magically verified once you gave it. Someone has also verified it, and it cannot be like fully automated. Of course, parts of it can, because you could be theoretically looked up in some databases of known offenders, checked if you are one of them, but still, like, someone would need to check if you haven't done any mistakes given your data and so on, and also if you have uploaded a non-fake ID picture as well. But the thing is that our user model, as you can see on the screen, has grown since the beginning of this analysis. And it has grown so wide that you can already see the scary big ball of mud that's around the corner. So let's stop for a second and what we have done here and where we have achieved. So by looking at those screens, we really did some very superficial but very real analysis of requirements. Some of the information I was giving you is like off these screens, like these comments about law obligations and so on. But really what we did is that we looked at those images and we did some analysis and we come up with our mental model, not to confuse the database model. This is our mental model of how this whole thing could look like. And then we straightly translate it into the code. Well, very coupled one with the database, but anyway. And if you think about it, the models are omnipresent. Like there is like one fun model that explains why you need to have coffee in the office. That programmers' brains, they take coffee as an input, and this is their fuel. and they output the code. So obviously you can't have a IT company without a coffee because the code won't be there. Well, this is maybe a joke, but still, this is some kind of a model. Another model of mine, like for example, is how do business guys come up with business ideas? And they look at the reality, they see some opportunity, they try to write it down, formulate it, maybe create some called business model again, how they will earn, how the company will be profitable, what are the main strengths, and so on and so on. So my point is that the models are omnipresent, and like we don't operate on the reality, we operate only on model level. So this is our like simplified but very actionable projection of reality. And then the thing is with the IT projects and programming in general, that if we try to create just one model, just one way of looking at reality, it won't cut it. It simply will lead to this scary big ball of mud thing that we have saw a few slides before. And here comes the domain-driven design, which says a lot of things, but amongst them says, no, you should not be creating a single model because you will just lead to a disaster. And any model you create only makes sense within a specific context. So of course, when we are looking at the user interface, which we just did, by the way, and it makes sense to kind of think of a user as a person who clicks through these screens, and we maybe are wondering about the problem specific to the UI, how to make sure they click that button, how to make sure they will spend their money, how to make sure there will be no friction before they will let us earn some of them. And so an old Latin motto still rules, which is divide et impera. So in order to make a maintainable system, and this is one of the thoughts derived from domain-driven design, is you need to have a multiple context, and you also have a multiple models. And these contexts are bounded, in the meaning that when you have let's say KYC bounded context, which is, by the way, this thing for verification and so on, this is acronym for know your customer, which is commonly used. You may have a model of customer there, but outside of this context, it doesn't make sense. That's why this context is bounded. And there also may not be a customer specific. Maybe you just need a list of verifications or whatever. Maybe there is no even notion of a user or whoever is using or whoever gets verified. Maybe it's just verification, whatever. The thing is, you don't care outside of this context what is inside, and it doesn't make sense outside of this context. And in this example, I put different perspectives on the user, of course, to be this more approachable for you. So like in authentication context, we have a subject. This is like a party that authenticates against. In gambling, there's, of course, a gambler, person who gambles, and KYC is a customer because it's know your customer. So kinda obvious. And this, and coming up to this bounded context phase, so that we can see and differentiate different bounded contexts in our software, is a crucial moment, and is the first strategic pattern of domain-driven design. And the reality would be now simple from now on, except that these contexts somehow need to communicate. But how to do it? If they look at reality in different ways, how do we settle the differences? And the answer is, well, just like the people talking with each other when they speak different languages, they need somehow to find a common ground. But more often the situation is that the one person just speaks the language of the other person, and so is with the bounded context. So in this example, like we have this gambling context that will be dealing with gambling in general, and it can ask the KYC context, is this person verified? So they can gamble. But what it does really, these contexts are not really created equal, because like gambling would be probably much more complex. There is much more logic. In KYC, there will be less, because it's basically just a bunch of data containers kept there. Someone needs to click and confirm the person that registers is okay, and so on and so forth. So do we really want, because the verification part is a is part of KYC context. So do we really want it to leak to the gambling? And the thing is that we can choose whose language do we use in the communication. So in that way, we sacrifice a bit a KYC sanity because now it knows about gambling a bit, but it's an easy question. Can this party gamble? And on the other hand, a gambling remains clear because it doesn't know anything about KYC. It asks a simple question that's still within its model. Can this party gamble? And that's it. So a more specific, so this mapping of how do these different bounded contexts talk to each other and whose language is used is called context map. And this is the second very important artifact of strategic domain-driven design, when we decide whose language is used in communication. And it also defines whose model is well superior. But this is only our choice. We decided, for example, by using the criteria, which bounded context is the more important or is more complex or whatever. I mean, this is something we choose. And yeah, at the context map is the most critical artifact of domain-driven design on strategic level. And the thing is that if you are not having it, you are not really doing a domain-driven design. So you need to have an idea where are the bounded contexts and which models to which context they believe and they belong, and how do contexts communicate with each other. But of course, even if you come up in such a context map, and let me be clear that in the beginning of the project, you have the least knowledge that you will ever have, because you will only get more by either doing some analysis in advance or either by working on the project for a longer period of time. Even if you create the best context map in the world, there always may come a new requirement that will just make your beautiful vision collapse like a house of cards. And so the context maps has to be maintained and has to live. In the typical situation that personally I have encountered twice in my career was that the business came with an idea of making subscriptions functionality in the system. If you don't know it, who's the best customer, I can tell you right away, then this is a person that actually pays you for the product, but doesn't use it. So you still get the money, but there is no risk that they will complain about anything. And subscriptions, going this line of thought, are the best business model because it encourages the situation when someone pays but doesn't use the product. So yeah, no wonder that more and more companies are turning towards this business model. Nonetheless, so we get a new requirement, we start analysis as the usual. We're trying to create user stories out of that, or task or whatever we are using. And if we are starting to draft the idea, seeing what's really to be done, where we are becoming more and more afraid because, oh, they just want to different plans. Of course, they will be changing every half a year. They need upgrading functionality, downgrading, possibility to cancel at any time, and so on. And you already see that there are so many things to do that they won't fit into the sprint, just like the text doesn't fit on the slide. But there wasn't yet the most important question asked, which is how subscriptions will affect the rest of the system. And the answer is yes, they will affect it all, because you will, of course, if you have a subscription, which you can, by the way, buy before you are verified, then you will have a priority, and your case will be reviewed in less than 4 hours instead of waiting up to 3 days. And of course, you will pay less fee for gambling and a few other advantages of having a paid plan. So the thing is that suddenly everything will start depending on the subscriptions. And again, we are at the big ball of mud, or dangerously closely to it, because suddenly everything depends on one part of the application. But the thing is, this is not true. It doesn't have to be true, because first of all, you don't really have to know from KYC or gambling that subscriptions even exist. So we could simplify this communication between this context by just has priority or get fee. But we can go a step further ahead. And we can actually make the bounded context of subscriptions to tell to KYC and gambling what's the priority and set fee. So the thing is that this entire functionality is not only about subscription, but it's also about introducing priority concept to KYC bounded context, and it wasn't there before, or to introducing some fee manipulation in gambling, and probably it wasn't there before, or maybe it was, but now it will be simpler. But the thing is that the language and runtime dependency can always be flipped around, however you like it and however you want it. So a subscription is such a thing that will affect half, if not the whole system. So we rather not want the entire project to depend on it. Just imagine what a disaster it would be if this was a microservices, because like everything would have to go to the subscriptions microservice to get some data. And this is just a simple recipe for a disaster. Okay, so speaking of bounded context, like there are several heuristics how to find them. And one of the first things that you should know is analyzing the business, that enterprise that you will be writing software for. What are the different areas of activity of this company, how they are making money, what other things they have to do, what are the law obligations, and so on and so forth. And this is really the first thing, but I'm skipping it because it's a 30 minutes presentation, and I would really like to show you how this all thing affects the way you write code. And probably if some parts of the code are being created for different stakeholders, it's also a strong indicator that maybe these are different bounded contexts. Well, for example, KYC, the only driver to keep the data is not to send the cozy emails, but it's law obligations. So it's a completely different reason for this code to appear than how do we make more money. Yeah, so it's completely different stakeholder, completely different reason to appear for this code. And the other heuristic is, can we pull this part of the system and sell it separately? Or turning it the other way around. Maybe has someone already did that. And this is also the case with KYC, because like there are companies that will offer you to look up people in databases of known vendors and so on. So yeah, this heuristic also works in that case. Another heuristic is there a single source of truth for every fact? So now this requires a bit of explanation. So it's not that we cannot have the same information in few places, because like I just did that with subscriptions, where of course subscription is the source of truth of if there is a priority KYC handling or what's the fee. But it's a source of truth, and KYC and gambling and any other bounded context can keep just a cache of it. But still, if I need to learn exactly, I still need to go, if I want to learn exactly about a single fact, I still need to go to a single bounded context to know for sure. The other thing is can we observe some phenomena of data or feature envy? And this is a situation when a bounded context needs to perform some operation, but there's a lot of chatting with other bounded contexts. So probably this context boundaries are made wrong, and it needs to have more insight. And the simple one, maybe we have the same names for some things, but it behaves differently. So this can be also observed at the level of individual classes. We have also seen a case when we just used a username, very general one, for a few different concepts. So it's also a heuristics. It's probably different bounded context. And the last but not least is, have we maybe confused the user interface way of looking at things with how the business works? And this was the case with the example, with the case study of the bookmaking. Okay, there are also a few more, but those are the basic one, and I really encourage you to start from the subdomains and problem space. And now, assuming that we have this wonderful context map, what we can do about it now? Well, of course, we can implement it and make our code look nicer. And there are basically two ways to do it. First thing is we can make a modular monolith. So it still will be a single repository of code, but now divided into components. Or we can use those hated microservices. So in case of modular monolith, the thing is that we just maybe cut along the line of bounded context as a first try, and we'll just create a different components out of it. Just combined authentication context with web application, because like maybe we can handle all the authentication there, so we don't need a separate context or code for that, because there are already libraries that do so. And one thing about components is that they need to be a separate namespaces. So like in code, you can have one root package and several sub-packages. It can be several, they can be also up to the point like Django applications, because there are also namespaces separated from each other. But there are a few other things. So first of all, every component needs to have an API. So this is like, a gateway or a door, how to use a features or a code from this component. So we don't reach out somewhere in the guts of the component. You use its API to use the services it's offer. And in case of KYC, it can be, for example, a facade design pattern. It can expose following functionalities. This can gamble for gambling and set priority for subscriptions. And also the thing is that components are encapsulated, just like the objects are. So they have some code that's meant to be private. It's not meant to be used from outside. And some of the code is meant to use for outside, just like the facade. So the public thing will be API, and the private thing are all the mechanics, internal stuff, and so on. And there is no really, well, Python maybe doesn't support it super directly, but the tools do. So if you declare a dunder_all property on a module level, then, for example, PyCharm would warn you that, hey, please don't use it because it's not declared in dunder_all. Of course, the program will work and so on, but the tools discourage you to do so. And this is great because it shows other developers how to use the code and what you meant to be used and what's not. And in terms of enforcing these architectural rules, where there is a tool called import linter, in which you can model kind of a contracts between how you foresee how the components will talk to each other, in a form that, for example, gambling cannot import subscriptions, but subscriptions can import gambling. And yeah, that's the way to use it. And if you happen to use PyLint, I also wrote kind of a plugin some time ago, which also kind of lets you specify and enforce this kind of architectural rules. And okay, and in terms of communication between the components, well, in case when they call themselves directly, so the calling context knows the model of the called context, then you just import the code and use the facade and call it as usual function. There may be a situation when you need to flip the arrow of dependencies, and in that case, you create in one component an abstract class that will be using the model or the language of that context. For example, here we have gambling, and it defines the abstract class of permissions, and that abstract class is actually implemented in KYC. And by the way, this is also a very thin anti-corruption layer, because if there's any translation needed to KYC language, it's done there. And the other way of integrating is using events. So again, one component can emit an event. And for example, here we have Django signals, but please don't think this is only for Django, because you can actually use any tool, any framework. It's just that this is simple. So for the sake of presentation, it should be nice. And so the bottom line is one component emits event, and the other one, well, subscribes to it and triggers some logic. And a very similar library, Blinker, also does the very similar thing. And in case of microservices, well, really, we also start off with just cutting along the line. But then we can use some patterns of microservices, like backend for frontend. So this will be a service that's kind of a facade over multiple microservices below, and it can also provide this means of authentication and so on. And we also take into consideration some architectural drivers, like which things we need to scale independently and which things we need to deploy independently, and so on. So yeah, so this is another things to consider when we are translating our context map into code. And to sum up the integration way between modular monolith and microservices, in case of a direct calling one context to another, just like GameLink did for KYC, we just use the component API in modular monolith, and in microservices, we call an API of another microservice, or we send a message through a broker, like RabbitMQ, for example. In case of inversion of the direction, then we can, in modular monolith, use this abstract class, concrete class on the other side trick. And in case of microservices, we either have a dedicated API, maybe created with a technique known as consumer-driven contract testing. And in case of events, it's even simpler, because in modular monolith, we use like libraries like Blinker or these Django signals, or we just also send the message through a broker. And in microservices, we always send the message through a broker. And so the bottom line is, as I'm closely drawing to an end of this presentation, is that the rules of designing the split of a large project are really very much the same, regardless if you are working with a single repository and modular monolith or a bunch of microservices. From a point of view of domain-driven design, it doesn't make much of a difference. The integration techniques are also similar. The implementation, of course, will be different, but the principles are the same. And yeah, just to sum up the presentation, just bear in mind that whenever you are about to add another field to a database model or any other object that is defined in your code, just think twice whether it's not the moment that it should be splitted into another component, or maybe that moment was a while ago already. And from that position, I encourage you to read more about domain-driven design, because it was only tip of the iceberg, and I really passed over in silence a few important topics. And if you prefer to watch than read, then there are all DDD Europe conference recordings available on YouTube, for example. And in terms of books, the one nice starter book I'd recommend to you is Domain-Driven Design Distilled by Vernon. And in the end, you may end up with a much better project than the one you saw depicted as a big brown ball of some substance. Because we need to understand that the better code is not only rooted in better programming skills, but it's also takes a great deal of understanding the problem we're dealing with. And I'm not telling you that domain-driven design is like the best thing since the sliced bread, but it's a very complete and comprehensive technique to drive better software design. Thank you. And yeah, that's me when I not avoid Barber. And in case you are interested in more thorough example of code, you can check out the repository on GitHub I created to present such patterns in modular monolith. Yeah, so now I really finished.
All right, I remember when you had that haircut. Yeah, exactly. Your current one isn't bad at all, though. Anyway, we're not here to discuss haircuts. Thank you, Sebastian, so much for the presentation. Again, super excited to have you here as a speaker. I wanted to highlight some of the discussion that happened in the meantime while we wait for more comments to roll in. Yeah, just very quickly, because there actually is quite a few comments rolling in. One is, especially like this one, microservices, a solution you don't need to problems you don't have, requiring resources you can't afford. There's a very interesting discussion beneath that. And this one.
I believe that's a quote, actually, but I don't remember whose one. Yeah.
Speaking of quotes, we replaced our monolith with microservices so that every outage could be more like a murder mystery. I thought that was quite funny. Anyway, very excited about the discussion in the comments. I wanted to highlight all of the comments, but actually we already have 3 questions in, so let's get it right into them. Przemek is here with a question. Thanks for being active in the chat, saying, would you identify any DDD tactical patterns worth implementing if you cannot go or are not ready to go for full, I was listening, domain-driven design architecture, for example, in Django?
Yeah, I mean, What Przemek is writing about is that the domain-driven design, if you Google that, has two sides of it. So one is the strategic part that I was just showing you, and there's also a tactical part when there are actual code patterns like an aggregate class or a service class. So regarding parts when Django maybe falls short, I would like use a service pattern, definitely. I wouldn't go with repository, to be honest. I wouldn't go with aggregate on entity that much. Perhaps maybe if there are very specific conditions, but like I would definitely call for service in some cases, because really in Django, the object managers fulfill the same responsibility as repositories. So basically, speaking plain English, they do the same thing. They do the same. They are created for the same role. And also aggregates are not that trivial, because like DAS models are the way to go to Django. And I don't do a lot of Django recently, but it's the thing that this framework is opinionated. I can respect that, especially that when you work against it, it makes you feel pain. So don't recommend that.
Okay.
But it will play nicely with service.
All right. Thanks for the answer, and hope that satisfies Przemek's curiosity there. I got a very nice one from Jacek Ziółkowski coming in. Thanks again, Jacek. And he's saying, where and how do you draw the line between this project is too small to use domain-driven design and we can always refactor later, and this project will be huge and we start with domain-driven design from the get-go?
I mean, usually you have some information beforehand. What's the, for example, let's say, time horizon for this project? Like working in the software house is a bit different perspective, because you never know how much the project will be with you, because there are many things to take into consideration. When working in a product company is completely different stuff, because you will know mostly what's the budgeting for the project and so on. So like I am not sure if I would use this approach of telling this too small or too huge, because like I would say one needs to do their homework first and really see what's the thing. But I would like to answer the question that wasn't asked actually. When
Do you mean the one below?
Yeah.
Okay, let me read it first.
I mean, related to this one, like when in general you don't use domain-driven design, and strategic one at least, yeah, because tactical is a different situation. So in terms of strategic, let's say you are doing a startup, but not like a thing like, I don't know, Uber for cats or whatever, when you just take an existing business model and modify it a bit. And it's not a startup according to Lean Startup book. It's something that when you expect that there might be some pivots of business model and so on, then in such an unstable environment where it will be hard to really unleash the power of the domain-driven design. That's how I see it.
Okay, so sorry, I got just a tiny bit lost here. So you answered both Jacek's and Bartosz's question now?
No, this was a follow-up to Jacek's question.
Oh, okay, follow-up to Jacek's question. As a reminder that was the question, sorry. So now we'll get to Bartosz's. And he's asking if we can go on, if that's not a problem. Can you think of a situation where using many microservices would be the only reasonable solution?
I cannot really answer that, because I don't think I have worked with a system on such a scale. Like, don't get me wrong, in WebInterpret we run thousands of pods or Kubernetes, but it's a bit different situation, and it's not that like everyone is. And I also not sure, what do you mean by many? Is this dozens, hundreds, or thousands? Like in my mind, but it's only from my experience, which is pretty limited on that, I haven't seen a situation when more or a few dozens microservices would be reasonable. But like, I'm not Allegro, and so I don't know.
All right. And then one last question before we go to Łukasz Langa in our last presentation is from Czeslavo. Hello again. He's saying, who should be involved in the process of actually identifying contexts in your application? Should it be business people, tech leaders, developers? What is your opinion on that?
Well, of course, it depends on the organization, but I would definitely involve at least tech leaders at different stages, of course. And I mean, no, tech leaders would be always there. It depends. If there are architects, yes, there should be architects because maybe the project is part of a larger strategy of an organization. And maybe tech leads, but definitely there should be stakeholders. And in terms of techniques that facilitate finding bounded context, like we have event storming, I guess the big picture one should be the most appropriate for starters. And in terms of finding the subdomains and the problem space, yeah, definitely you need stakeholders, and product owners, or someone who works on their position. Yeah.
All right. And that should, I hope, answer the question. Everybody whose questions you answered are saying thanks with a winky face, thanks with an emoji, thank you with an exclamation mark. And Samir is saying thank you for the great presentation. Thank you, Samir, for letting us know. All right. Again, we're right on time with the agenda. Super happy to see that. Thank you, Sebastian, for your presentation, and thank you for being part of our conference.
My pleasure. Nice to be again here. Thanks.